So, hi all everyone, welcome to DRB. This is Aswathy Alex, and I like to start on by saying is that being disciplined is the greatest form of self-love. So, by the beginning of 19th century, we had lots of associations coming up, especially the association started off on the basis of social religious reforms and other associations on the basis of societal structures. But by the 19th century, the middle of 19th century, these started to take a political color. More importantly, traveling towards formations of political organizations. And we had lots of associations here in India and also in London, solely on the basis of India's political, socio-economic reasons and purposes. So out of all these associations we had in 1885 Indian National Congress, but this was just one of the other organizations and associations which came up during those periods by the end of 19th century. But what happened after few years? Out of all the other organizations and associations, Indian National Congress stood out to be the most premier party. And even now, even after all these hundreds of years later, we still have the Congress standing and going forward. So how did that come up? From all the other associations, how did people, all these great leaders like Nehru, Gandhi, started to associate themselves with the Indian National Congress? And how did they set themselves apart from the other associations? We're going to discuss all that in detail right now. So, starting off from Raja Ram Mohan Roy's Prakasika Sabha to the other organizations and associations were formed so that this will able to cater to the needs of the common people, to give them rights, to look after the welfare of these common people. So, in short, this was more or less made like a platform, sort of like a bridge between these British officers who make the decisions to these people. But the issue was that this was solely being restricted towards only the higher class or the zamindar class people who could only afford these associations, and the other people's problems were totally alien to these people. So, in short, these torchbearers are the ones who are totally ignorant about the common man's misery, common man's problem. So, to a larger extent, even if they want to bring about welfare to these people, they didn't know much to work about. And one more concern over here is that repressions of the British officers, even if they were in highly radical, these associations were in radical in nature, but even then, the British officers try to nip it off from the bud, even if they started to come big and even if they started to develop and evolve themselves to be a much more spectrum to speak about their own worries and problems, the Britishers make sure that they would be silenced. So that was the other issues as well. And about INC, we know that it was established in 1885, but the lightning conductor was a retired ICS or the Indian Civil Service officer of the British government, and that was Hume. So they already had, that is the INC people and the coordinators and the members already had a foothold in the British officers and more importantly the British offices, because a person from their side was also here. So there is also a theory associated or believed according to it that there is a belief or people believe during those periods that Hume was set up by the government for these people so that they can have some place to vent out their steam, to vent out their frustration. So it was sort of like a safety valve created by these British officers. So some, whatever may be the reason, it actually worked for us. Okay, they thought, they could just bring out a platform for these people to vent out their frustrations, but we actually used Hume as a lightning conductor, so it worked for our own favor. And the other thing which set apart Indian National Congress from the other associations was that the other associations were made by the zamindars, high elite group of people who were highly aristocratic in nature. But here in Indian National Congress, yes, they were also mostly from the high class, but more importantly, they were the educated intellectuals. So, what happens when people are educated enough? They'll start thinking. They'll start having all these ideas, thoughts, how to bring about change to the people. So that will be their essential thought, and that will be their first thought to bring about a welfare to the society. So the people who are leading the others or people who are leading these associations are highly awakened individuals and intellectuals. So that is one more brownie point to the International Congress. And one more thing we should understand is that right from the beginning of the International Congress, they try to be more inclusive in nature. They try to include the others too into their fold. They try to include different categories or different spectrums of people. We also have Kadambini Ganguly, who was actually the first woman person or woman graduate from the Calcutta University, and she addressed a Congress session. So they try to include, see, this was a period when there was a separate class division between women and men. Women were not supposed to be educated, and even if they're educated, they were highly discouraged by the society. But the International Congress, they embraced such people, they took into their fold, and they gave them a public podium or a platform for them to speak up. And since these congressmen were highly intellectual and awakened in their sense of thought and understanding, their goals and aspirations of the Congress were in alignment with the aspirations of the common man as well. So this enabled them to mobilize the mass people, and more importantly to make it more of less like it's our versus the British than some people and some categories. It was us versus the British for that period. And Indian National Congress were not radical in nature when they started off initially. So we know we have Hume and the other officers being scrutinizing the Indian National Congress constantly. And the leaders in the initial points too were highly moderate in nature. They weren't radical. So there's no need for repression over here. And more importantly, all these constitutional agitations were within the confines of law, which is made legally by the British government itself, that they can address the government, they can give letters and petitions to the government seeking for reforms and reformations. So this too didn't create any problems for them, and the common people too had an understanding and too had an assurance that there is an association, International Congress, who would be the voice of us, who would speak for us. And what sets apart the International Congress from the other associations was that they started to work from the grassroots level. They started to educate and, more importantly, mobilize the people from the grassroots level. So this essentially made a very strong public opinion among the masses, and also they worked on the other side simultaneously as well to be a bridge to the British government as well. So this sort of like brought in the two spectrum together in one place. And then we all know what happened rest after that. Gradually, with the society being evolving, with the Britishers resistance also coming back behind, these people and these international congress too evolved to be more of a radical. More importantly, I can't say they were radical. It's what isn't revolution, it's evolution. What is revolution? When it's a premature, when your evolution or your growth and development is not in accordance with the pace of the society, it becomes a revolution. But it becomes evolution when it is in correct order, in correct pace of the society and the other developments. So I would say that Indian National Congress completely evolved according to the time and need of the society, and more importantly of the British officers as well. So even they evolved, and the Indian National Congress too evolved according to it simultaneously. And with the time, gradually the pressure by these International Congress on the British government too increased to a limit that they started listening to us. They started to make reforms in accordance to it. The Britishers started to appease the International Congress and other nationalist leaders. And that's how we got our freedom. And yes, I would like to conclude or wind up the session by saying is that the leaders of all these international congress were highly ambitious in nature. Everyone, starting from Dadabhai Naroji to Gandhi, all were their own sense of ambitious. More importantly, they had a very true essence in their mind to give out justice to these people, to give out good welfare to these common citizens. And that is what materialized, and that is the reason why Indian National Congress stood itself apart from other associations prevalent during those period. So that's it for today's video, and I really hope that I was able to convey much sense and understandings to you all. And thank you so much for watching, and bye bye.